I'm responding to Joe Scarborough and Max Boot right now. So it'll work its way into the podcast, darling. Don't you worry one little bit.
As long as it's for the cause, I guess I'll go along with it.
Yeah. You can listen to The Professional Left on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There's a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for February 23rd, 2018. It's not safe for work.
Coming to you live from Bruce Reiner's Chocolate Milk Diversity Workshop, it's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Blue Gal. Hey, Blue Gal.
I'd like you to say that again.
All right.
Coming to you live from, and then emphasize, Bruce Rowners, so because you went over the Bruce, and a lot of people don't know who he is. So
Got it. You want me to do it from the top?
No.
Ready, set, go. Coming to you live from Bruce Rowners Chocolate Milk Diversity Workshop, it's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Blue Gal. And Blue Gal, a lot of people don't know Bruce Rauner, but they do know Governor Hedge Fund.
That's who we're talking about.
The same. Yeah, he decided to up his rating among people of color in the state of Illinois.
I think he was upping his rating among the Who Moved My Cheese CEOs, old fart golf course CEOs who love stuff like this.
Oh, he's so funny.
Some sort of thing with milk and chocolate milk and drink the chocolate milk and it's so tasty. And it shows that you appreciate different kinds of milk.
Yes.
Or something.
Diversity. The butter cow fits in here somehow. I don't know how. We have a butter cow here every year at the state fair.
Republicans just give me a headache at this point.
Yes, they do. I will tell you that I'm a little distracted because I was having a one-sided conversation with Joe Scarborough and Max Boot on the Twitter, and I will just let you know that.
Go ahead and tell me about it.
Max Boot is not going to become a Democrat.
Oh, no.
Yes, because Medicare for All will finish what Trump started and bankrupt America.
Oh.
And Joe Scarborough can't become a Democrat because as reckless as Trump has been driving up the deficits, Democrats somehow managed to one-up him. First of all, Max Boot, total war porn asshole from the Bush administration. Joe Scarborough, big backer of the Iraq War. When do we see our $2 trillion back from the war you led us into? When can we have that money back? Love to talk about that. Love to talk about the fact that Bill Clinton actually paid down the deficits created by your hero, Ronald Reagan, and your hero, George H.W. Bush. Clinton actually cleaned your shit up. And then you turned the country over to George W. Bush, who burned through the entire surplus, put us right back into deficits, worst deficits in history. And I might remind you that every step along the way, all the reasonable Republicans were saying that this was entirely impossible. Tax cuts were great. We're never going to have deficits again. It was all going to be hunky-dory. And when all that shit blew up in their face.
Itself in growth, which is exactly the lie that Donald Trump and his minions are telling today.
Now, Joe Scarborough has his own show on MSNBC where he lies every day. And Max Boot is a respected MSNBC contributor. So MSNBC is less of a network now and more of a Bush regime dead-ender witness protection program where we just rehabilitate people whose reputations are in any other context. No one would touch these people with a fucking barge pole, but they know people. They're friends with people. They know each other. They know each other from the old days, from the old neighborhood. So it's all good.
In sound bites and know when to stop for commercial and behave themselves on cable news. So
what do you think, Bill Kristol? Well, let me just tell you, Max Boot, and this is a future that back in the day, I don't believe Steve Gilliard would ever have imagined.
Yeah.
This is like Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Seeing that film of himself saying, no, when you wake up, you're going to be the bad guy's best friend.
Well, let's talk about some things that are more important than that. Let's do a news roundup and talk about the survivors of the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, who have had a week of being incredibly courageous and articulate and changing the world for the better.
They have changed the trajectory of the gun debate in this country. Quite a thing. A hell of a thing.
And there's a couple of things related to that. An article was sent to us on Twitter noting that these kids don't give a shit about access to U.S. senators or Republicans or media people or displeasing Marco Rubio because he might not be on their Sunday show if they ask a tough question.
Yeah.
Because they just survived a shooting. And it doesn't matter to them who he is. It matters what he will do. And the other thing, you have been talking a lot about this week, watching our kids.
Yes.
And how they behave on their phones and how they behave in the world with their friends.
Yeah.
And for good or ill, what they do and how they communicate and what they bring to their friends and to the world is on camera. And these kids are very used to being on camera. We don't think about it that way, but this is a generation that has been trained on YouTube.
Yes.
They've been trained by Tyler Oakley and some other YouTube stars that they follow. How to talk to a camera, how to prepare yourself, and there have been tutorials all over YouTube on how to make the background look right and how to hone your message. And these kids, good teachers and teachers in school districts with resources, which I kind of imagine Parkland, Florida, having a 2,000-person high school, has these kind of resources, have embraced this and allow students to make videos and do multimedia presentations in order to learn. So they've already had this as part of their learning experience, part of their school experience. And so coming out and talking about what happened to them during the shooting and what they want to happen in terms of what they now call the Never Again movement. Mm-hmm. And it is striking to me, and one of our podcast listeners, an expat in Mexico, wrote us and said, it's really interesting that here are these kids saying never again, while massive numbers of adults are telling them, let's prepare for the next attack. Mm-hmm. And the moral argument is on the side of these kids. They are the moral majority.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to remind people, these kids did not come to high school that day with a political inclination.
Right.
They came to school to learn. And
no, they didn't. They came to see their friends.
Yeah, that's true.
That's why I feel like high school. We know that. People go in high school go to.
They came to school to learn about math.
But they didn't come to school to see their friends die or get shot, and that's the point.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, and my other point is that Rosa Parks was not the first woman to be refused a seat on a bus. Right. It happened often. She was the one who was perfect to fill that role. Mm-hmm. And tragically, these kids are the ones who are perfect to fill this role, because what they're able to do in this extraordinary moment is get close enough to the camera that anyone who would have carried their message 10 days before would never have been allowed anywhere near a camera. No one who wants to tell the story of why the fuck is the NRA allowed to get away with this?
Well, and
why the hell?
The Sandy Hook parents have said that, and the parents in all the other school shootings have said that. And as long as it is, I think personally, not millennials saying this, it goes in and out, because they're not looking for that audience on cable TV, right?
Well, and that's
the media's fascination with millennials is helping this move along to this extent.
And that's my point. It took when the emperor never has any clothes.
Yeah.
And you can scream it all you want from the cornfield, and it won't do you any good. But there comes a moment every now and then when, by tragedy, usually the right person or the right people are suddenly in the right place at the right time. And all of the filters that the media uses to make sure that this conversation never happens and that we never actually engage on it, and that nobody ever puts their finger in Marco Rubio's face and calls him a coward and a liar on camera and watches him shit himself. The entire media is set up to avoid moments like that, to make sure that those people are never, ever held to account for anything. And suddenly we have a moment where these horrible things led to this very unusual circumstance where, you get to face your accuser in a very real sense. You get to face the person who is truly responsible for your condition and ask them without a political agenda, why are you letting this happen to us?
Well, and that happened multiple times last year with the town halls over healthcare. For those Congress people who were either brave enough or stupid enough to go before their constituents and talk to them about it. And the result of which is many Republicans are leaving the Congress, right?
Yes.
Can't serve my masters anymore. I've smashed and grabbed with the tax bill all the money I'm going to personally be able to benefit, and my donors got what they wanted, so my work is done, right?
Yeah. One of the other outcomes of this was we had a Sarah Palin notes on her hand moment.
Yes, we did. During the listening session. Tell me about what you thought about the listening session in general, anyway.
It was scripted. It was an attempt. It was a staged attempt to make Donald Trump appear to be human.
And I'm impressed that someone in the White House had enough influence to get him to sit there and do that. And had the presence of mind to hand him a note that said, I hear you. Say, I hear you.
Remember to say, I hear you.
To say, I hear you. That was Hope Hicks or, Ivanka, someone who said, Daddy, you need to do this and look nice because it's bad television that you haven't said something nice to these poor kids.
Yeah, recording this on Friday, all of which was undone at CPAC today. Yeah. All of which was just tossed out the window.
Because the last person Donald Trump talked to yesterday was Wayne LaPierre, and so he's speaking in an impromptu moment to reporters. CNN, to their credit, put LaPierre speaking at CPAC and Trump speaking after he'd spoken to LaPierre on this kind of, cabinet sit down and showing them side by side, say that, basically Trump just read to reporters what LaPierre told him to say. Yeah.
I despair of the pivot, honey. I despair that pivot's coming.
Yeah.
No, and that word has fallen out of completely out of use anywhere because there's never going to be a pivot. Well, but it really is like watching a dog that's been trained to balance a treat on its nose. Yeah. And Donald Trump can hold the posture of a human being for about 45 minutes, maybe an hour.
Well, Charlie Pierce, remember what Charlie Pierce said last night too, which is it just proves that he has absolutely no genuine opinion of his own. Period. Right.
That's right. And what does he do? I don't know. He doesn't believe anything, so anything's possible, I suppose. But if you are around him, you can train him. You can put that little. You can say, okay, now, good boy. Who's a good boy? Now you're going to get to go golfing. Yeah. You get to go golfing, but first you have to sit up in your hind legs for 30 fucking minutes and not be a complete racist asshole. Can you do it? Can you do it? Here's some notes. Remember, you're at a listening session, so I want you to listen to people. Can you do that? So, and then he gets his treat, which is to go on Twitter, attack everyone in sight, go on CPAC, attack everyone. Just do what he does, which is spew vile, racist, snake stories about immigrants, attack John McCain. That's a beautiful little side
line
there
for Donald Trump to attack John McCain dying of cancer. Yeah, okay.
I believe Meghan McCain promised that he was never going to do that again.
Yeah.
Before she got married to Ben Dominic. Again, head of the Federalist, who are publishing very pro-Trump. That's going to be a hell of a Thanksgiving dinner because he married into the McCain family because that's the path to power for little Ben. Yep. He got his boost from his good friend Chris Hayes. And now he's national, and now he can marry into the right family and move his career along a little bit further. But it's going to be really weird because his political daddy is Donald Trump, but his father-in-law is John McCain.
I don't want to get off of this listening session before we move on to other things. You talked about the treat on the nose and the trained dog. I wanted to applaud Rachel Maddow for having Nicole Hockley on her show. And pointing out and taking the time to allow a listening session of our own to hear what people were saying at Trump's listening session and actually play their words and give 8 or 9 minutes of her show to that, which is precious real estate at MSNBC. It really is to give away. Samuel Zeif, I believe, Zeif, of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, sat next to Nicole Hockley, whose son Dylan was shot and killed at Sandy Hook. And Rachel Maddow introduced the segment by saying, watch the contrast between these two people, someone who is raw. And this young man, Samuel, is just, has had this immediate experience of being shot at and being hiding in a closet and seeing his friends die and sobbing and just raw emotion.
Uh-huh.
And Nicole Hockley, who has had the curse or the blessing of years between the death of her 6-year-old, Dylan, and now. And I watched this with my son, who is 19 and freshman in college. He's home for spring break. And two things were interesting to me. One was then Rachel Maddow interviewed Nicole Hockley in studio, and talked about, of course, Samuel had just had this terrible experience. It's very raw emotion at that stage, and that's very it's important to listen to that. And then Rachel Maddow said to Nicole Hockley, you were really very directive to the president in terms of, here's what you can do now. Here's how you can be a leader. Here are the actions that you can take today. Here is what will bring leadership to the situation. And it really was her words over and over again to this clearly mentally deficient, inarticulate buffoon who is
bitter old racist,
running our country right now. There was programming going on from a lobbyist who is, she is the director now of Sandy Hook Promise. And she has advocacy and is saying to, and this is the other side of the coin, I would say, to those kids talking to Marco Rubio, right? This is her saying to the President of the United States, quote unquote, so-called, what Hillary Clinton taught the Black Lives Matter kids.
Yes.
I need legislation. You need to give me 10 points that I can put in a bill and pass.
Yep.
And Nicole Hockley had the points that she wanted Donald Trump to hold a ceremony and sign an executive order doing this, 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 and this. You can do this. You can be a leader this way. And she was complimentary and guiding him that this would be about him. He could do this. She knew who she was talking to. And she knew what was going to motivate him to do anything. And whether or not it worked depended on how quickly Wayne LaPierre got to him. So to me, that was significant, that she knew how to talk to this guy.
You know what she understands, Lugao? I mean this in the nicest possible way. Always be closing.
Always be closing. Yeah.
If you're an activist, especially if you're an activist with not a ton of money and you're trying to get something done, every now and then a door opens and this is her
chance. Exactly. Yes. She's in the goddamn White House. Right.
Be ready. Have your 5 points memorized in your back pocket and get in there and know how take your best shot. Right. Take your very best shot at getting your shit done. Right. And use every opportunity, however it's presented to you, to move your ball forward. Yep. And it's incredibly impressive when people have the presence of mind to do that, especially when it's in such an incredibly fraught place. And my hat's off to all of them. I've been listening to fathers and teachers and coaches and cops and students who remind me that this country is full of amazing people.
Yep. It's not all going to shit.
No, this was not Superman High School.
Yeah.
This is just a high school full of American kids with American teachers and my mom was a teacher. My dad was a principal. When they divorced, they married a teacher and a principal. My sister's a teacher. These people, the last thing in the world anyone would ever want to do is come to school packing. That's just a completely alien idea to any of them. But I do understand that, they live their lives protecting and loving kids and doing everything they could to make sure that their charges were safe and taught and moved along up to, civilized adulthood. And that happens every goddamn day in this country. And one of the things that happens in a tragedy like this is you get to see, oh, my God, look at these amazing, ordinary people. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's horribly small of me to try to find a silver lining in any of this. But there is a silver lining there. With any luck, we get to move the needle towards keeping other kids safe.
Well, and I have tremendous hope because these kids are all going to be voters and all going to be activists. Yes. And we're going to have several congressmen and congresswomen come out of this experience. I guarantee you. Florida, the word Florida congressman will not be a pejorative 30 years from now, right? And credit, I want to pack on the back one more person, Tanzil Phillip, who is another student who, when he was interviewed on MSNBC, repeatedly said the NRA and the Republican Party.
Yes,
and
yes.
Good for him.
And never stopped making sure those two culprits were named and shamed specifically and explicitly, which is something, and linked, which is something that almost no pundit or commentator or journalist
they won't name and shame a political party that way. Yeah, the political party that needs to be named and shamed, it's always Congress in Washington, right? But Nicole Hockley, I was very moved at the end of the conversation because Rachel Maddow said, thank you very much. Nicole Hockley, her son Dylan was killed in the Sandy Hook massacre, etc. And I lost it because forever her bio is going to be Nicole Hockley, her son was murdered. And I couldn't absorb that. Like, what must that be like to have you're an activist, you're moving the needle forward, you have a goal, but to get that goal and to be that activist and to have that platform, your biography is the death of your son, right?
Yep.
And
I was wondering if the Bible bits has anything to say about that.
Yeah, right, because that's the thing. That's God's biography, too. It occurred to me that if I were in that position and it was 6 years later, I would realize that the alternative is that's not part of your biography. Everyone forgets your kid died, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not an option for her. Her life is now about raising the kids that she has and making sure the Never Again movement gets the gas that it needs to move forward. And that's what her life is all about. So if the alternative was, no, I'm just housewife Nicole Hockley who gets to go on with her life, that isn't the option. She's not going to choose that. She's going to choose, yes, let me carry this dead son of mine, Dylan, around with me for the rest of my life and make a difference using that. So it's interesting because as you're talking, let's bring in some Bible bitch here.
Bible bitch.
That's not scriptural.
I have been thinking for over a week now, and I've been trying to write 3 pages a day in a Lenten journal for Lent. The verse that keeps coming to me is "Suffer it to be so now." Suffer it to be so now, and like just relating to Trump and the headaches that it causes, all of this causes, and the anguish that people are going through, and I mean, I know we're going to do News Roundup. I just found out this morning that Trump's Immigration Department, Immigration and Naturalization Service, has taken off the words "nation of immigrants" from their mission statement. We're not a nation of immigrants anymore, according to the Immigration Department. Okay, I mean, these are the kind of losses that we're suffering, and that's just words. That's not what's happening to refugees. That's not what's happening to these kids who were shot. That's not having the biggest idiot in the country purportedly being the president of the United States, someone who's so unqualified, and all of the harm that he's doing. And so "Suffer it to be so now" has been going through my head. And I thought to myself as I was writing about it, oh, this must be from Jesus on the cross, right? Suffer it to be so now. I'm going to heaven. And so, stupid me, I should know my Bible better than this. I went and looked it up.
You have a degree on the wall, Blue Gal.
I forgot where it came from. And it's the baptism. It's John the Baptist, who is, out in the wilderness. He is part of a Jewish tradition of baptism and repentance. And it's repentance that he's looking for in baptism. It's not cleanse your sins and we're all going to put a little water on the baby's head and then everything's going to be nice. We're going to have cake. This is
It was about changing.
Out in the wilderness and change your life and give up sin and stop this crap and repent. And so here comes Jesus out into the wilderness to meet John. And John's like, oh, no. No. You're God.
No.
You're the Son of God. You're God. You should be baptizing me. I should be repenting to you. And Jesus says, that. Basically, no. I'm here. I'm human. I am the Son of God come to human beings to be human. And I'm here to be human, so baptize me. Do it. And the way that the Message, which, as you know, is my favorite translation of the Bible, but Jesus insisted, do it. God's work, putting things right these centuries, is coming together right now in this baptism. So John did it. The moment Jesus came up out of the baptismal waters, the skies opened up and he saw God's Spirit. It looked like a dove descending and landing on him, and along with the Spirit of voice, this is my Son, chosen and marked by my love, delight of my life. And so it's, oh no, you're God. No, I'm human. Suffer it to be so now. I'm human. Baptism, repentance. You're my Son. It's this big circle, if you can imagine that circle. And I have sent you as human to do this.
That particular quote, is it in Mark?
No, it's in Matthew. Matthew 3. Matthew 3. Yeah.
Okay. Because at least one of them starts, the book starts with the dove coming down, ends with the dove going up. And it's a frame story.
Right.
It's a very specific moment in time and very specific events that happen in this particular order. But the idea is, no. I'm here to learn what it is to be human, which means I'm going to do all the things humans do, including suffer and die and be betrayed and be deserted and be left alone. And I know these things are going to happen, and there's nothing I can do to stop them because that's the plan.
And I know that we have a lot of atheist listeners. I also know that our atheist listeners would never, ever deny a Sandy Hook mom the ability to think of her child as being with God or being somehow comforted. That is the number. If you want to make a society more secular and more atheistic and lose their religious faith, stop infant mortality. As infant mortality goes down, people don't need their religion so much as a crutch. And I'm not saying that's all religion is. It's not. That's not all religion is to me. But losing a child, as I have done, as other people have done in their lives, is the thing that makes people say to themselves, or that requires often people to say to themselves, no, I know that child is protected and loved and continues and has some place to be where they are happy and good and protected and loved and all that.
Would you like to go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum now, Blue Gal?
You know that Matthew begins with the genealogy of Jesus. It's a completely different approach to Jesus' life. It's a Jewish story, and it's about him descending from the Jews. And so the baptism and so forth is a Jewish ceremony. And again, we've gone on too long about that. Why don't we go to the whatever other spectrum you want to go to?
Well, no. I think we've covered sort of the humane and
you want to go to the profane
heroic
is what you want to do.
And now it's time for us to put on our hazmat suits and take a little wade through the other end of the political spectrum.
And moral spectrum, right?
Yeah. Oh God. Let's begin with Republican Congresswoman Claudia Tenney of New York, who's in a hot race in New York. She's the incumbent. She's an elected person.
That's important. Yep.
Said during a radio interview that, quote, it's interesting that so many of these people that commit the mass murders end up being Democrats.
And it wasn't a radio interview. It was a podcast interview. It was with an upstate New York podcaster who I listened to the whole thing because I clipped it. It's up at Cricks and Liars if you want to actually hear. If you don't believe she said that and you want to actually hear her say it. And the interviewer is this upstate New York. You know, Albany is corrupt. New York City is corrupt. It's us upstaters who are all white, you know, and gun owners who don't commit crimes. And he was making this argument about New York City and Albany telling us gun owners what to do, and we're law-abiding citizens. I'm making the law-abiding citizen gun owner argument. That's what the host was doing. Well, and let's Claudia Tenney, the elected official, said, you know, the demographics of this are so obvious. And it was so fucking racist. It was so fucking racist.
And of course, it's Democrats.
Yeah, and then it's Democrats. Yes, right.
Now, lest you now we are in the middle of a lot of different wars on a lot of different fronts, but the greatest war we are having right now is the war for the past.
Yeah.
Who gets to decide what the past looks like? And there is an enormous, well-armed, well-equipped, highly mobilized, technologically advanced army that is desperately trying to make the past go away, trying to make the past never happen. Joe Scarborough is leading the way. Joe Scarborough and David French from the National Review had this little interplay today. David French is supposed to be one of the woke Republicans who suddenly the scales fell from his eyes and he says, "Oh my God, I watched this town hall meeting and it's so bad." But his response was, "It really isn't fair to say that all the crazies are on the left." That was his response. And I'm literally looking at the article in the National Review, and what's the first fucking line in the article?
Both sides?
Rage more than personal than political exists on both sides. And I don't need to read I literally don't need to read any more than that because I know you're full of shit. And they had this incredibly fatuous, ridiculous interplay that I kept inserting myself into, involving just the last couple of years, just the last few years, as if this was a complete manifestation out of nowhere. And the reason I bring that up is this congresswoman from New York. Let me read you another quote, if I may, Blue Gal. Pop quiz. "I think the mother killing her 2 children in South Carolina vividly reminds every American how sick society is getting and how much we have to have change. I think people want change, and the only way you get change is to vote Republican."
That's Newt
Gingrich in 1994. Yep. That's Newt Gingrich from a quarter century ago. These people have been playing this card. Liberals hate life. Liberals hate freedom. Liberals want to murder everything. Liberals love terrorists for fucking ever. They built a party on paranoia, racism, hating liberals, hating brown people, hating women, hating immigrants. And guess what happened? Donald Trump happened. And now they're all fucking surprised by this. And this, if nothing else, it is really important for all of our listeners to keep a sharp ear out for the gross bastardization of history, because it really is terrifying when you look across the media spectrum and see how many of them are already lining up to do exactly what they did in 2006, 2007, 2008, which was lie about the past.
Those are the planks out of which the lifeboats are being built.
And they're being built like crazy.
Reinventing the past, right.
So that's my little soapbox moment. There'll be a few more during the podcast, I guarantee you. But I just want to mention that Melania Trump's parents might have relied on what they call chain migration.
You think?
And that's going to be kind of weird. It would be weird if anyone in any position of authority held anyone responsible for anything. Right. But that doesn't happen anymore. I did hear, speaking of that, Yamiche Alcindor, I believe, was on television yesterday, I think. And I don't want to misquote, but she was talking about, look, remember back when Democrats controlled everything? Well, why didn't they pass gun control then? Fair point. First of all, Democrats had control of everything, quote unquote, for about 6 months, during which time we saved the auto industry, we saved the economy, we passed the Affordable Care Act and a bunch of other shit. And then we lost the majority and nothing. It was impossible to move anything at any point. And plus, there are a bunch of blue dog Democrats still in the party. Not a lot, but enough to sink any attempt to.
We passed a stimulus which the Republicans in the Senate insisted had to be more tax cuts.
Yeah,
that was.
But my point was, when I heard that, and I said, I really would like to be there, not to yell at her because I think she's a fine reporter and I think what she does is really good, but to ask her, please take a moment and unbundle what you just said, unpack what you just said, because the predicate of your question is this. The Republican Party is such a shit show of racists and imbeciles and lunatics and con men that the only way anything is ever going to be passed that remotely resembles sanity is if Democrats control the entire government. Right. You were saying that we have to have one party rule because the other party is so fucked in the head that it can do nothing but destroy everything it touches and loot the place before the entire place burns to the ground.
Jennifer Rubin has essentially said that. The only thing that's going to stop Trump is a Democratic Congress. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I do want to take a little sidebar there because every time you hear, what happened when the Democrats, what about the Democrats? Look, what you're saying is you're writing off the entire Republican Party. And I'm cool with that. I agree with you. But say that. Right. Don't imply it. Don't just shrug your shoulders and say, well, you have to have 60 votes for everything. No, you don't. You have to have 51 votes in the Senate. You have to have 60 because Republicans will filibuster everything the minute they're in the minority. So it's these little things that get worked into our vocabulary and our understanding of how things are, they're just not true. Mm-hmm. So one of the delightful little things that happened this week was Donald Trump blamed Barack Obama for Donald Trump.
Yes.
And then he told...
I'm really getting ready for him to instruct his immigration department to say we are a nation of Eastern European C-class nude models. Yeah.
Well, every day, every fucking day he wakes up and tells Jeff Sessions to round up the usual suspect, who are, Hillary Clinton and the FBI and God knows who else. It was, and this is a continuum because yesterday, Wayne LaPierre at CPAC went out of his way to try to get FBI agents shot.
He did.
He really did.
And
Dana Lash went out of her way to try to get teachers shot. And that's what, and they're, because nobody's going to come after them. They've got a solid wall of protection around them. They don't give a shit about what happens to those people.
And but Ben Shapiro lead a chant of lock her up right as Manafort was getting indicted again?
Yeah,
and Gates.
Rick is being let off in manacles, and Manafort's facing a million years. That's not cat years. That's human years. 1 million years in prison for just running basically the Teapot Dome scandal out of his own back pocket while he's running the Trump campaign.
For free.
And they're screaming
for free while he's running the Trump campaign for free.
And none of this appears on Fox News ever. None of this ever shows up on their fucking radar. The reason that your crazy Uncle Liberty is completely like a different species at this point is he doesn't hear any of this. And he will not hear any of this. And he would rather saw his ears off than ever hear any of this. So, but for the purpose of discussion among sane people, yes, Donald Trump blamed Barack Obama for not doing more about Russia, something Donald Trump. The day will come, I swear to God, when Donald Trump will say that because he speaks of himself in the third person, that Donald Trump was just an amateur president. He was just a part-time president. He was never really a president. He was like,
I don't know,
like a coffee boy president. He brought coffee. That's all he did.
That's sad.
It's sad really and predictable, and it really will happen. You want to talk about Jared Kushner for a second?
Poor Jared Kushner. His security clearance forms are being held up again.
Yes.
And he doesn't want to give up access to all those cool American intelligence documents that apparently he's allowed to sit. He and anybody that wants to come in and hear Donald Trump get briefed on high security stuff because it's fun and the donuts are good. And I imagine there's a whole lot of financial advantage to knowing the dirty little secrets of all the people that you're bidding against. Where we're not going to have a treaty. Yeah, sure. And Jared's all about the Benjamins. Which, it just get used to being all about the cigarettes because that's currency in prison there, Jared. And the degree to which all of these people are broke and desperate for money during the time that Russia just starts dropping bales of money on them. And then you have the Republicans changing the platform of their own party. And it's stolen money. Let's be clear. Yeah. That's what Putin did, right? He went in and just cleaned out his country and took it all over and said, it's all mine now. That's why he's the richest person on earth. So, And that money, if it's going to be spent internationally, and this is all just zeros on paper, folks. We all, right? You get that. But those zeros on paper have to be laundered, have to look like they came from a legal place. And we all know this from watching our Breaking Bad episode.
Yes. Or even Ray Donovan.
You need a car wash or a gym or a loan from a legitimate U.S. bank to a U.S. citizen who cares if he has 4 passports and a bag full of money with a gun on top in his closet, right?
Who doesn't? Who doesn't, Blue Cow? Actually, I'm literally looking at 3 passports right now.
If you missed that, the first time Paul Manafort was indicted.
Yeah. When they kicked in his door, when they knocked their way into his home because he was a flight risk.
They confiscated his 4 passports. They took those away. And so it's not to be believed. And I also want to point out, so Chris Matthews, who is unwatchable at this point.
It really is unwatchable. Have you read my book?
But he said, he was talking about Manafort, and he said, I remember, when Manafort and Stone, they were big high rollers in this town. Remember that? Yeah. And, had a great reputation among Republicans who wanted dirt so they could win elections. And I remember personally, and I'm sure you do too, Driftglass, summer of 2016 when Manafort was brought onto the campaign and he was going to wrangle delegates for Trump at the convention. And it's like, finally, the Washington Press Corps was they're bringing a professional onto the team to handle this and to do it right.
And now?
And they announced he had a reputation and street cred because he had run political campaigns in the Ukraine.
And what are literally all those people saying now? Oh, everybody knew he was dirty.
Everybody knew he was dirty. Yeah.
We all knew. We didn't tell you, Rubes, out in the fucking cornfield because it's none of your goddamn business. You don't.
Exactly. We didn't tell the voters that. We didn't tell the voters that Trump's campaign manager was dirty.
No, and these are people that these are the MSNBC, NBC. They all know this stuff. They all know this shit. And they never talk about it because it would turn us into a nation of pitchfork wielding peasants, and they would suddenly not have jobs no more. Paul Manafort
would lose access. Manafort would not sit down to an interview with Chris Matthews in summer of 2016 if he didn't play nice.
Our job is to sit out here, watch their show, buy their shit, and shut up and believe every word of it. And before the fact, they say one thing, and after it all goes to hell, they all go, well, we all knew.
Yeah,
everybody in their fucking hairdresser knew that Paul Manafort was dirty as sin, that he had blood money pouring out of every orifice in his body, that he was taking Russian money from, grabbing it, he was broke. Like, actually, no, we didn't know any of this shit.
No.
We suspected it, but you all own newspapers, right? You own radio stations and television stations, and at no point during the empty podium summer did you see fit to mention any of this, all of which you now say was common knowledge at Sally Quinn's cocktail parties. But bros before hoes, I guess.
What do you think then about Dana Loesch saying?
Well, she blocks me on Twitter. So.
God, and her photoshopped ass on the cover of her book. She at CPAC went so far as to say the cable news networks love mass shootings because it's good for ratings.
Look who she's talking to.
Look who she's talking to. Yeah, exactly.
And she took off her top and shook her tits at him. Because that's what she's doing. The pornographic equivalent of doing that is what she's doing with her mouth. Right. She's telling people the bloody, horrible conspiracy that are all out to get you. There's nobody but us. We're all in this together. We're in the bunker. We're perfectly safe as long as we all do what the man says.
And I think part two of her statement is really important. She tried to side with the African American mothers of Chicago who lost children to gun violence. No one ever held a town hall for them. Wait a minute. Chris Hayes did hold a town hall for them.
Here's the tape. I have the receipts. Here's the tape. But that was not important to your fucking racist narrative.
Exactly.
So why bother? Yeah. And none of these meatheads out here are ever going to know about it because they all watch Sean Hannity. They don't watch the news. They watch this. They watch a series of lying propagandists, fascists telling what they want to hear. And no, she's just the new model of Ann Coulter. They come off the fucking assembly line. They grow these people in vats someplace.
And that's why Marine Le Pen, it doesn't matter if Marine Le Pen's on there. No one's listening to what she says as long as she doesn't go off the reservation of Trump's great, conservatism's wonderful, you need a gun, and tax cuts. As long as she doesn't go off that, I'm sorry I said reservation, as long as she doesn't go off of that talking points, she can, as long, and she's blonde and hot. Nobody's actually listening to the content of her address, right?
Nobody's hearing the cue stepping.
Fascism, go.
Yeah.
And so whether it's Tomi Lahren or Ann Coulter or Marine Le Pen or Dana Loesch, the brunette version, we're good. Come on up. And it's diversity because we have a brunette up there.
and speaking of brunettes who toe the fucking line.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for.
Toe the fucking line.
That's the word I'm looking
Mitt
for.
Romney thanked Donald Trump for his endorsement.
Yeah. What
Mitt
a
Romney
douche.
Mitt Romney. If I understand correctly, Mitt Romney should be knitting somewhere, right?
No,
because he's 70 years
that's
old.
That's another thing we don't say.
And he lost a bunch. He lost repeatedly, and decisively, and he's old, and he's yesterday's news. So Mitt Romney should just go away now, right?
Right. He should retire and not run for anything anymore. But just apparently, he wants it all possible ways. Just like Oprah. Oprah was on 60 Minutes this week and trying to get us all to have a conversation with Trump supporters.
Now I have a headache. I forgot all about that. A little headache right behind my left eye. That little tiny
headache thing. Because let's listen to our Trump supporter cohorts and let's listen and have a conversation.
Let's open our hearts.
And open our hearts to each other. And, no good deed goes unpunished because then Trump called Oprah very insecure and accused her of being biased. So there's no winning.
No, honey. There's so much winning.
Yeah.
There's
apparently there's plenty of rich men in the world now. According Oprah was, of course, then on the Jimmy Kimmel show last night and said, "Oh yeah, I've got millionaires asking me to run for president. They promised to raise $1 billion so I can run for president against Trump." Because money isn't real anymore, folks. It's either you have it in multiple zeros like Oprah, or you have $5 at a time like us, and there's no in between. Let me just say this: the
money you send us is real.
Yeah.
The $5 we get from you guys is very, very real.
That buys groceries and stuff like that.
Some months
but really, I can't get over that Paul Manafort, lied to banks and was able to get credit lines of $30 million because Trump became president.
Because Paul Manafort. Because Trump became president.
Yeah. And we don't, we have homeless people in this country. We have hungry kids in this. We have 20% of the kids in this country in poverty.
We have uninsured people in this country and underinsured people in this country. And yet Medicare for all.
And we're supposed to, we are now removing after-school food programs for kids in public schools. We're not going to fund those from the federal government anymore because there's no proof that actually leads to good outcomes for kids. I say we feed him Paul Manafort.
Yeah.
He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life anyway. Why bother feeding him?
I have a side bet that if once the contract goes out for hardening our schools, Eric Prince is going to get 10% of whatever they pay out.
It's all about the contracts for Trump's friends, whether it's food boxes for food stamps or hardening schools.
Betty DeVos's brother, in case you've forgotten, runs the world's largest and most evil mercenary army.
Yeah. And did you notice her country club I'm being very gracious smirk during the listening service session?
Sure. With none of this
boys sobbing, teenage boys sobbing over the loss of their friends, and she had this country club smirk on her face. I just wanted to smack it.
These are people from a different country, from a different planet, visiting the Aborigines, and laughing and smirking and sort of having a good time because none of this affects them. And by them, I mean Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, and Chris. None of this affects any of them. None of this has any effect on any of them. They live in a gated world where our concerns are occasionally they have to come out and protest that they do care about us so that we can give them power again. But they really don't care. It's irrelevant to them. And the goal has always been marshal enough rubes who are willing to cut their own throats to make liberals mad to get through all of the horrible things, to break the chains that are keeping them from absolutely plundering this country down to the floorboards and instituting an autocratic government, an authoritarian government. That's what they want. That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal. That's what binds fundamentalists and gun nuts and oligarchs and racists all are that the federal government operating in a healthy way blocks them from each of their individual agendas. And so they have a common enemy, which is us.
All right.
And they want us out of the way.
I'm going to read these real quick. Alex Vanderzwan pleads guilty in Robert Mueller's probe. The son-in-law of a Russia-based billionaire admitted to lying to investigators about his communications with Rick Gates, the former Trump campaign aide, who actually was also on the transition and in the Trump White House for a while. And that's a connection to Trump. Trump wants a lot more guns in schools. It's too soft to target. Trump's approval ratings back down to 37%.
Where they'll stay. It'll go up and down between their 40%.
37% is that core group of Fox News viewers. Democrats flipped a Kentucky state legislature seat in a district that Trump won by 49 points in 2016. Linda Belcher won a special election in Kentucky's House District 49 by a 68-32 margin. Trump carried the district by a 72-23 margin in 2016. That's turnout.
That's pure turnout.
Huge turnout in Texas for Democrats in early voting as well. Senior Department of Health and Human Services official John Cordova was placed on administrative leave for promoting bullshit and conspiracy theories on social media.
Well, you know what I remember, Blue Gal?
What kind of conspiracy theories? About what?
I didn't look that up.
Oh, okay.
But I do. But I was going to add in there. I was going to copy and paste the Barack Obama application.
Yes.
From back in the day when I was considering applying for Assistant Secretary of Labor, which would have been a good one under the Obama administration. There was you had to turn your pockets out. They want to know every little thing you've ever said online, anything you might have ever done that might possibly have embarrassed the administration, so they could vet you and usually reject you. Mm-hmm. That's how thoroughgoing they were. These people literally drag the sewers of their own criminal circles and goofy friend enterprises to come up with the worst people in the world and just shove them through and put them in charge of shit because we're all criminals here. It's a confederacy of criminals and dunces.
Well, and clearly, the background checks going out at the Trump White House are non-existent. I did look up this Cordova guy. Cordova, they all of a sudden discovered that he shared on Facebook stories that Kaiser Khan was a Muslim Brotherhood agent and a Muslim plant working with the Hillary Clinton campaign. He also shared a false story alleging that Ted Cruz frequented prostitutes. He also liked to share memes that showed African American men and members of Black Lives Matter either comparing them to Nazi brown shirts or suggesting things like no mother should have to fear for her son's life every time he robs a store. That's what
nice.
That's the argument of Black Lives Matter is that it's the right to rob a store. They're all thieves and
they're all thieves and criminals.
Right.
And by the way, this is the common everyday mother tongue of Republicans.
You get in the email
living
every
in America.
day from
this is not
crazy Uncle Liberty.
This is not extraordinary. This is not unusual.
Normal.
This is their baseline language.
Yeah. This is what they do every day.
For a fucking this is what we're going to get to David Brooks in a second,
Why?
and I'll talk because other people wrote about him. But this is what happens when you live in the gated community. You never actually hear what actual Republicans are really saying in the world, and you get freaked out as a Republican.
Yep. And then you go, oh my God, the Republican Party, Marion Le Pen, but she's a Nazi. That's terrible. Where have you been that you haven't seen this? Come on, Republicans. If we have seen what Republicans have shared with us on email. Crazy Uncle Liberty share. Are you telling me no one has ever emailed that kind of crap to Joe Scarborough in his life?
You've never listened to Rush Limbaugh for 5 minutes at a time. You've never watched Fox News. You never read the Drudge Report. This is actually Paul Krugman performed a public service this week by doing a drift class, which is saying, hey, isn't it a shame how everything went to shit when Donald Trump became president? Because everything before that. Oh, wait a minute. Before Breitbart, there was Drudge. Before this, there was Rush. Before this, there was Newt Gingrich. And no, they've always been this way. And that's why Paul Krugman's not allowed on TV. All right, moving on. Speaking of Fox News, Fox News is launching a new subscription-based service because the Rubes still have some money left. Based on for Fox superfans, it's called Fox Nation after the fan website. So it's going to be Sean Hannity after dark. Lounging around in his Speedo, talking about, sexy time stuff. I don't know. Whatever it's going to be, I don't want any part of it. It's subscription-based, so we're spared from touching it, being anywhere.
Trump's infrastructure plan no longer includes the requirement that energy companies use American-made steel to build their pipelines. That was an Al Franken thing. That was an Al Franken thing. That
can't be true because Donald Trump said 1 million times he's going to make them use. They're going to hate it. They're not going to like it, but he's going to make them use. Oh, no, that's another lie. That's okay.
Wait until there's an indictment, and then we'll sneak that in.
Yeah.
Saturday night, Sunday morning, Trump blamed everybody but Russia as he lashed out against the Russian investigation in a 9-hour, profanity-laced and error-laden tweet storm. He attacked the FBI, CNN, Democratic Party, Barack Obama, National Security Advisor, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Hillary Clinton, etc. He never criticized Russia or Putin's attempts to undermine U.S. elections. I'm not going to read a Trump tweet on the air.
No, but it's bad.
It's bad.
It's really bad. Yeah.
The Republican National Committee is paying Trump's former bodyguard. The Republican National Committee, folks, is paying Trump's former bodyguard $15,000 a month for, quote, security consulting. In other words, he's got to secure his mouth and not talk about Donald Trump.
That's what that is.
I did have a comment from a listener about how obsessed you are with David Brooks Driftglass, and I wrote back to him and told him the story of Bess Truman, and how you got to get Harry Truman to stop saying manure so much. And she said, you know how long it took me to get him to say manure?
Well, I promised this week I would not talk about David Brooks. I gave you that promise, and I plan to honor that promise, Blue Gal. Instead, I'd like to read from a very thoughtful article from the respectable magazine called Esquire.
Okay.
On the importance of rudeness.
That's from GQ.
I'm sorry, that's from GQ. Even more respectable than Esquire is GQ. And it's in print. It comes in paper. It wouldn't give
David Brooks at the top.
Yeah, it does. David Brooks wrote something terrible this week, which is not a surprise. Times pays him handsomely to write snotty, unedited editions of David Brooks Understands the Little People on a regular basis. They will not fire him, or even not even for takes as dopey and casually nauseating as this one. This week, David Brooks he literally said, the only people who can lead gun control to conclusion, who can lead on gun control, are red state gun nuts.
Right.
And it is the job of liberals who are making everything worse because they shame those gun nuts. They make them feel bad and make them dig in their heels. Our job is to sit on our hands and shut up and listen to them, heed them, open our hearts to their crazy-ass conspiracy theories, and eventually we'll have a consensus, and then we'll have some sane gun legislation. And that is the only way, according to David Brooks, that anything ever got done in history.
David Brooks was universally denounced for this.
Yes, he was.
My Twitter was agog at this statement.
And the reason I mentioned it is because literally 1,000 people tweeted me and emailed me going, "What are you going to write? What are you going to write?" Well, and I wrote a column, and I wrote it, but I based it on the historical evidence that David Brooks has always been this. The reason I keep my eye on this fucker. And Brett Stevens and people like that is that they're the ones who are they're the really horrible people, because they're the ones who goddamn well know better, but do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's always both sides. It's always both sides, and it's always liberals should sit on their hands and not ask for much and just wait. Just wait and listen humbly and be quiet. And eventually the Confederacy will dissolve and slavery will go away. And we'll reach some consensus on abortion rights, and schools will magically integrate themselves once George Wallace, the scales fall from his eyes. And fuck you, David Brooks. Nothing has ever worked that way in history, period. And the thing is, David Brooks, for all of his awards and honoraria, actually has one and only one degree from any school anywhere. He is a history major from the University of Chicago. He fucking well knows that nothing works this way. He lies. He's been lying this way in the New York Times for 14 fucking years, and clearly the Times doesn't care.
No, but you made the point that he lies to a different subset of people than Sean Hannity does.
He does.
But it is the same kind of lie.
It is.
And
it's worse.
And it's
worse.
Money. He's lying to people with money. And as long as money is speech, I've had reason to repeat this from when I said it in 2011.
Yep.
When money becomes speech, money becomes the only speech. And David Brooks will have a job at the New York Times as long as people with money want to hear what he has to say. And he frames it the way they want to hear.
And so the only thing I brought to the discussion, because at this point, everybody, not that it will matter, because none of this is going to matter. None of this is going to make change his employment circumstance. No one's going to stop in his circle of colleagues stop respecting him. The only thing I can bring to the table is my historical perspective. The fact that I've been writing about this guy since I started blogging. I really do know a whole lot more about what he has said on every subject, and he is the representation of that establishment point of view. He is the bellwether. He is their avatar. And so when I talk about him, I'm really talking about the entire Beltway media industry that keeps him employed and keeps him respectable and keeps him protected from any blowback from any of the bullshit that he says and writes.
His job is to keep that lifeboat afloat.
Yes.
It is to keep it so that Republicans will always be part of the conversation, quote unquote, as he directly said. I mean, that to me is the thing, is the points at which he directly says what he's going to say and doesn't couch it, where you have to go search for the razor in the apple, where it's just right there on top of the apple, where he says, you have to listen to red staters. It's like when the times when it comes to the surface that clearly, those are the time, and there's 1,000 tweets about how awful it is because everyone notices. That to me is a sign of a critical moment in history.
Yes,
and you have said this, that is the time when you need to strike against both siderism, against centrism, against but the Democrats, or let's listen to the Republicans. No, they are complicit in the power structure that put Trump in office. They must go. No Tea Party, no labels, no centrist project, no Unify America with their, we're going to bring red America and blue together, blue America. I'll say it again. We're going to bring red America and blue America together with unity white.
Unity white.
Literally, that's what they said. 3 colors, unity white.
I would like to add one thing to this from Bruce Bartlett, because it was a really good Twitter stream back and forth with Bruce Bartlett and some friends of his. And he was saying a whole lot. Bruce Bartlett is a former Reagan Republican economist who has completely jumped ship. He's now 100% on our side, as far as I can tell. He's welcome on the lifeboat. There's a seat for him at the lifeboat. And we went there. What you're saying. Yeah, our lifeboat among the angels, or at least the decent human beings. Right. There was a back and forth between him and people on there covering a lot of the same territory, which is, it's all one side. This is what they do, and giving a historical perspective. The right has been going after the media since Agnew, since Nixon, and since Pat Buchanan was writing speech for these guys, and have gutted the media. The media is terrified of taking on the right. And he said the left absolutely has to do the same thing. If you ever want to get anything done, you have to break these people. You have to break them. You have to make them as afraid of the left as they are of the right, because they are just going to keep rolling over for every whack job in the name of balance until you make them hurt, until you bring a shitload of pain on top of Chuck Todd, and he can't go to work without crying, and so he has to start balancing his show. Bruce Bartlett didn't say all this, but it's the clear implication of what he said. The difference being that the person on the thread would say, well, there are a lot of people who have been doing that. And, the crooked media and Vox, and we got to mention, bless their hearts, Professional Podcast have been saying this shit for years and years and years and years. Bruce Bartlett said one thing that made me a little mad, which was a one-off comment on Twitter won't make any difference, which is not what we do. But he did say this. He said, it doesn't matter what those people do until Democratic leaders start directly attacking the press, not the freedom of the press. But go directly after them and saying, no, the problem with this country is you fuckers keep putting lunatics on television. You're the fucking problem, Chuck Todd. Until that starts coming out of the mouths of people with senator and congressman and party leader after their name, as opposed to my good friend Chuck Todd's on my podcast. Yay! Nothing's going to change. And I tend to agree with that. Except I think instead of going after Chuck Todd, you should be going after Phil Griffin and Andy Lack. And those the people who actually make management decisions of these organizations. But I agree with them right up to the point where what we need are heavier guns. I don't mean that to be insensitive in a literal sense, but we need the same level of firepower brought to bear on the side of facts and reality and causality and history and actually making this country a better place that the right can find an infinite supply of, because they have billionaires writing them an infinite number of checks to take this country down.
It's fascinating to me too, and I think this will connect itself to that conversation you have with Andy Lack eventually, because
his trial.
Because corporations are separating themselves from the NRA.
Yeah, they are.
And I heard one reporter say, "This is unusual. This is interesting that they're divesting our connection with the NRA," and I'm thinking, were you there for the gay marriage thing?
Yeah, come on, man.
Were you even there for that? Because this is not the first time this has happened. And, Disney and all these other corporations were ready to move out of Georgia if Georgia passed a bathroom bill. Not a anti-gay marriage thing, but a bathroom bill. And the governor went, we're just not going to consider that right now. That's not good for the state's economy. And when it's when it's going to affect that goddamn bottom line, when you start going after advertisers and saying, look, you're endorsing complicity in racism. And again, I said this last week. What's on the other side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge is the vote for black and brown people. Mm-hmm. And if you are going to try to both cider that, you are on the side of racists. You are making an excuse for racism. And you and I went to an event this week, which was majority African Americans in the audience talking about
pretty much overwhelmingly.
But they were talking about small business and forming small businesses and getting loans from banks and trying to get funding for their small businesses. They were meeting with a congressional candidate who I voted for this week, early voting. And it is her last name. Her middle name is Dirksen.
Right.
Betsy Dirksen Lodrigan is her name. She's running in the Illinois 13th district. And I was impressed with her in that she waited until the end. It was her listening session. And she waited until the end and stood up with her notes and read back to them what they had said in a way that made it clear that she got it. She got what the issues were and what she could do to endorse legislation that would help the issues that they had.
And at no point did I see her holding a note saying, I hear you.
Let me say this first. Number 5, I hear you. No, she got up and she said, now, I want a hard look at how banks are lending to businesses and whether there is a racial element to that. I want a hard look at how we do incubator systems and make sure that businesses that have to jump through certain hoops have a one-stop place to do that, and that there's federal funding to set that up, and I can work toward that. And it was all about, a congressperson can't do everything. There are things that they can do. And again, it was that Hillary Clinton lesson of give me a piece of legislation or give me something where I can hook a piece of legislation onto it and get that passed so that you have this money or this source or this job person or I hire a staffer.
Give me an action item. Give me something to do. Yeah.
And one of the things she talked about was, Congress people get a certain number of staff people that they bring to Washington or that they have in Washington or that they have at home to do, constituent services. Yeah. And perhaps one of the people that should be on my staff should deal exclusively with assisting small businesses in my district to do what. And she just had great ideas. Yeah. But my point was, here was this majority African-American group looking to form businesses, right?
Yes.
And you can't sit on both sides of that. You can't say, well, on the other hand, no.
Fuck you.
Fuck you. No one wants to hear that in that audience, and it's wrong to side with that. It's wrong.
That's the thing.
Wrong.
It's more. Well, and this is. I would like to leave our listeners with this thought before we close, which was, it was not the Montgomery bus Twitter storm.
No, it wasn't.
It was the Montgomery bus boycott. It took actual action by people that made businesses lose money, that actually imposed an economic penalty on people for backing immoral causes and people to move them off the fucking dime. And it I know
inconvenienced the people with power.
Yes.
It inconvenienced them.
And that's what we have to do. Twitter storms are great and marches are terrific. And all the things we do now, especially giving people vocabulary to express themselves and understand where they are, what the circumstances are, and how to perceive this universe, because people are just drowning in bullshit at this point. But then you have to come to a point of action. What is it you're going to do that is going to make the people who are withholding things from you that you need or not taking the action you need? How are you going to use the position you've created for yourself with your podcast and your protests to move some piece of action forward? And that takes us all the way back to the beginning of our podcast, where sometimes if the door opens and you get the opportunity to confront power, don't confront them with just a wagging finger and you fucker. Confront them, if they're actual decision makers, with here's what I need you to do.
Each week we post to our Facebook page and website an Internet Kitty sent in by you, the listeners. This week our Internet Kitty is Jack Tripper, sister of Chrissy and Janet. The Three's Company cats are all female in this regard. Jack Tripper is a Turkish van, and I went and looked up Turkish vans. They're a fascinating breed of cat. They like water. They like splashing in water, or some of them like to swim. And the legend is that the Turkish van was the cat on Noah's Ark that swam to Mount Ararat in Turkey. They apparently have been traced back to Turkey, and that explains why to this day Turkish vans are a breed known as a breed that likes to play with water. Very interesting. You can send your internet kitty to us at our email address, proleftpodcast@gmail.com. Go visit Jack Tripper. Jack Tripper is a beautiful kitty, by the way. You can also write to both of us at proleftpodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to write us. We love hearing from you. Be aware that if you write us at any of our addresses, we reserve the right to read your email or U.S. Postal Service. Go Postal Unions! Letter on the air unless you say otherwise. Don't forget our gourmet coffee guideline. If you can afford to buy an espresso-based beverage for yourself, buy one for us. This is not charity. This is our job, and we appreciate your donations. Approximately 1% of our listeners support this podcast with a contribution. You can, too. See our website, proleftpod.com, for details. Our PayPal, postal address information, and I've been told it's pronounced Patreon information, along with our GoFundMe. It's all there at proleftpod.com. Don't forget, we lost half our podcast income when Amazon canceled our account. So we're trying to make that up.
Yes, we did.
And so if you can be passing along $5 a month to us, that helps us a great deal. Thank you.
Or we'll just fake our income statement by converting it from a Word document to a PDF. I understand there's big money in doing that.
Until the indictment rolls around, it's just a great idea.
Well, yeah, fuck, that's the future, Blue Gal. The future isn't here yet.
Think of what we could do with a $30 million home loan based on our 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath in Springfield, Illinois. It's worth $40 million.
If it's worth anything, it's worth $40 million. Our Russian banker says so.
Our Russian banker says it's worth $40 million. Thank you, Driftglass. Please share our show on Facebook or Twitter, and thank you for doing that. Hey, Driftglass, how are the Internet Kitties doing this week?
Well, Blue Gal, the Internet Kitties missed CPAC again this year because CPAC.
Let's think about living. Think about living. Let's think about loving. Think about loving. Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the popping and the lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the wine and the crying, the shooting and the dying, and the fellow and the switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional F Podcast is recorded under Creative Commons license. Copyright 2018, DGBG Productions, Incorporated.